Okay, so we are going now into phagocytes, which we've talked about before, sort of indirectly or a little bit. And these are white blood cells that consume antigens using phagocytosis. So when we learned phagocytosis, that's when we, excuse me, that's when we talked about them. And these are some cool pictures here. It's a different type of phagocytosis. When we learned about it before, we talked more about it kind of like wrapping around things, where these white blood cells are using more of a tentacle style. And here you can see them reaching out to get this bacteria. And then here you can also see, and this is a really amazing picture because this is super microscopic, and this white blood cells reaching out and grabbing this bacteria. Then we also have lymphocytes, which are a type of phagocyte. And there's two types of lymphocytes we're going to go over. So there's B cells. These are white blood cells that release the antibodies I talked about earlier in these notes. And so what we see here is we have some bacteria invading, and then this white blood cell is attacking it, and then it exposes the receptors that are on the bacteria, and it allows the B cell to kind of figure out their shape and stuff. And now the B cell is making these antibodies, which then it can use to neutralize those receptors. You can see here they're kind of locking together on the bacteria. And then we also have T cells, which you may have heard before, because they are attacked by HIV and are involved with the disease AIDS. So these are white blood cells that either can do three different things. So they can attract more phagocytes, so they can like call for help. They can attack different antigens on their own, or they can make more T cells and then do more of those other two things. And again, they are attacked by HIV. So here's a T cell attacking, again, maybe some cancer or some kind of bad cell that it's going after, and it's kind of wrapping it up with phagocytosis. This is a picture of a T cell that actually has HIV viruses on it, which are the yellowish, kind of looks like pollen. Again, just sort of spectacular photo here that we can even take pictures like this is amazing. But unfortunately, the bad side of this picture is that the T cell does have HIV viruses on it. So here they can do three different things. So here they can make more of themselves. They can attack on their own, or here it's called in a different type of white blood cell that's attacking. And so those three functions are lost when someone has AIDS, and that's why it's a big problem for them. So we're going to go over 7 viral diseases. When I started these slideshows, I had 5, and then recently I had to add 6 and 7. And obviously, I'm sure you know that 7 is COVID-19. Sort of challenge yourself to figure out what the other major virus is that I might have put in here. It showed up very, not that long ago actually, another virus that people were really worried about, and I've added both those. I've added 6 and 7 here as we go because of recent new virus outbreaks. All right, so influenza, or the flu, obviously a very famous virus. We can see the receptors all over it. Here we have a photo, and again, those receptors lock in. They tend to attack cells in our throat, or like our esophagus. Okay, Ebola's famous, very deadly virus. Again, this is the type that make your own immune system kill you because your immune system overreacts. And I'm showing you 2 pictures here because this is helping show that they change over time or can evolve. Herpes is an example of a sexually transmitted disease. And here we can see the receptors on the outside. HPV is also typically transferred sexually and is considered a sexually transmitted disease. Little story on this one. A few years ago, some student in my class said, "I heard there's a vaccine for cancer," and I was just like, "Nope, that doesn't exist." And I just, the second they said it, because people in the science department, somebody would have already had caught wind of it and would have been like, "Oh my god, oh my god," and I was like, that just doesn't make sense for a vaccine either. And then somebody was like, someone in class like, well, I think it's like a vaccine for something that may cause cancer. And I'm like, okay, it's starting to make more sense. And it turns out what they were talking about was the vaccine for HPV, which is pretty new. Maybe the last 10 years it showed up. And you might have got, I think it's called Gardasil. I think I have not gotten it. It's more of like younger generation thing. One of the things that was weird was they were saying it was only for girls, and that's the cancer connection, that girls have an increased risk of cervical cancer if they have HPV. But I was like, it doesn't make sense that boys aren't getting it, because why should boys continue to get this disease and girls be protected from it? And then I have, after a couple of years or even a year or so of that, I had kids start to say, oh, no, I've got, boys were like, no, I've gotten it. So I was like, okay, good, because it just didn't make a lot of sense to me just to vaccinate one over the other. Okay. Oh, are my numbers wrong? Oh, so when I said I've added new ones, it's number 5 and 6, because I always end with HIV at number 7. So in the last couple of years, Zika showed up. It was being transferred through mosquitoes. It was causing women to have babies that had birth defects, and I had never heard of it before. It suddenly kind of showed up within our world. And again, this is kind of why I've talked about things that we're doing to the earth might be eventually exposing us to new viruses that we would have been sort of shielded from by nature. But as we keep impacting and destroying nature and exposing ourselves to things that maybe nature had under control or trapped somewhere, we might be causing more virus outbreaks to happen as we continue to affect the world in that way. And then obviously COVID-19, you guys knew that one was coming. Here we see the protein receptors on the outside really clearly. And we already had some activities on that, so not going to really get too detailed on COVID-19, but obviously you're learning a lot about that. And it's a very unfortunate situation that this virus suddenly has shown up. Okay, and then we're going to wrap with HIV. So we see the receptors around. It almost looks like Cheerios or something around the HIV virus. Here's a little diagram showing it's coming into the cell and attaching its receptors. And then in here we see the ribosomes are now building HIV material instead of doing what the T cell wants to make. And then eventually the viruses are released and can go infect other cells. So this would be a T cell or a white blood cell that's now been forced to become an HIV factory. So now we're going to go over HIV, and I'm going to give you a little background story on when I remember this is another virus that showed up out of nowhere within my lifetime. And I always kind of joke that apparently Tiger Woods modeled for this pneumonia picture, and I'll explain why it looks like it's why I'm mentioning pneumonia, and I don't know. It always just kind of looks like Tiger Woods to me. So anyways, HIV attacks and controls T cells and makes them unable to protect the body. And essentially when the viruses have enough control or whatever and have killed enough T cells, someone ends up with AIDS, which is the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. And this causes people to die from diseases that would normally not kill a person. And that's why I have the pneumonia diagram. So usually in class, I go, okay, how many of you have had pneumonia? People raise their hands. I've had it a few times. And it's basically a bacterial infection in the alveoli in our lungs, which is what's shown over here. And so I'm going to now tell a story. Most students find it interesting, and a little bit about when HIV showed up and how people were reacting and some of the cultural elements of it as well. So I try to kind of paint a picture of what I remember. And what I remember is being in my friend's room, I think around like 10 or so years old, playing Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! On the original Nintendo video game system. And some kids, it's a pretty famous video game, and some kids know that game, and it's just a boxing video game. I just remember playing it, and I don't know, we're getting bored or whatever we're doing. We turned it off, and he had a TV in his room, so as we were like turning it off, suddenly the news came on like as we were turning it off. And I just remember, it's kind of my first memory of this disease was people on the news were just talking about how people were dying from diseases that they shouldn't be dying from, and they didn't know what was going on. And And it was, you know, pretty freaky, like, to hear. And this is when they didn't even know it was a virus yet. At first they thought maybe it was some new pneumonia, and then they figured out, nope, this is the same exact pneumonia as we've had. And these were young, healthy people dying, which shouldn't happen if they have access to antibiotics. And it was also happening with some other diseases that normally wouldn't kill people, and they were just like, we don't know what's going on. And at the time, just for some cultural perspective, because I think this is important, there was a high percentage of certain populations that were dying from these diseases before they knew, again, it was a virus. This is when they're still trying to figure it out. And these were intravenous drug users, like people who were shooting heroin into their veins, as well as people in the homosexual community. And so part of the cultural story that I've always told and was part of my memories was once those groups were identified as dying more from this new unknown disease, there were certain people who wanted to condemn them and say that they were being punished by by God, some were saying, or whatever their beliefs were, and that this was like a punishment for the way they were living their lives. And then eventually it was shown that it was a virus, and the virus was identified. And it really made those people look really bad, at least in my opinion, and many, in the public eye for the most part, because it looked like they were trying to judge and condemn these people for the way they live their lives, and say it was some punishment from some kind of higher being as opposed to a virus, and really just showed that they were really being really judgmental and hateful towards those people that they disagreed with how they were living. So it was actually really good when they found it was the virus to make that stuff go away. So this is showing different stages of the HIV infection. Oh, and just another more to this too. Then once they found it, now they could start really studying it and trying to work on it. Obviously, that's really important too. And I was a senior in high school when Magic Johnson came out and said that he had HIV, which was a huge shock to a lot of people. And I've seen documentaries on him where his huge rival was a player named Larry Bird, and they kind of hated each other. But then when Larry Bird talks about how he was just like broken down in tears when he heard what happened, that Magic Johnson was sick, because at that time they expected this disease to kill you in a matter of a few years. And a lot of people were really shooken up, even his rival. And people didn't expect him to live very long. And that was in 1992. So we're talking almost 30 years he's had the virus. And he has not gotten sick. And some of that is probably because of his general athleticism, healthy, strong guy. I've heard him talk about how he never was like into drugs or alcohol and things like that. So he's just super healthy. But I think it also shows that he has access to certain maybe drugs and treatments that other people aren't. And this is why some people feel like, maybe there should be more equality within our healthcare system, and then not maybe just the rich and powerful should have access to special treatments and drugs. But all the citizens can. And over time, they've become more accessible, but I just think Magic and Johnson and certain people had more access, while other people were suffering and dying from the effects of the disease. So here's some stages of the infection. So this is over years, and here's where, people were usually dying in, maybe 5 to 10 years. And this grayer line is the number of T cells, and this is the number of virus, can't call them a cell, so just viruses, number of HIV. And what we see, this is how they figured out that they were killing the T cells, because they didn't know exactly why people were dying even when they found the virus. So what they found was, as people's T cells were going down, the HIV was going up, and that's how they figured out that they were the HIV was killing the T cells. Okay, that's it for viruses. We're also going to do bacteria, so be sure to watch that one.